I want to talk to you more about the Disney years in a more appropriate location than we get with all the tin toys.
Let's stick to railroad.
All right, the depot. Where did this come from?
This started out as a motion picture set. We made a picture at Disney's called So Dear to My Heart, and Walt says, do you have a cute little drawing of a depot? So I fished it out of one of my old books. The art director and the set designers built it, but it was just a shell. And he says, why don't you take all these fancy parts and maybe you can make your own depot. So I put in a floor, foundation, studding, and rafters, and I tacked on all the trim. Of course, I had to finish it inside.
Well, and you've also filled it with memorabilia. Where does all this stuff come from? And I know you've been doing it for a long time, but many people can spend a lifetime and come up with one thing. You have a room full of it.
It's very hard to find. Now, I did this back in the 30s and 40s when I was a kid almost, and I haunted the antique shops and the junk shops, no bars. And people walk in here and say, where did you find this? And some of them only cost 25 cents. You can't go wrong for 25 cents.
Only in a slot
like this
machine.
lantern here. This is probably sells for $150, $200. I picked it up for $3.
But now somewhere you found like this old phone that pulls out, you know?
Those, in the 40s, you could buy these from a phone supply, second-hand house. This probably cost $5. It's now an antique.
If this depot were on a railroad back when they had depots like this, what would it be? What kind of a station?
It would be called a flag stop or a flag depot. This actual prototype of this depot was on the Lehigh Valley back east. So it's made exactly like it, except they had a little cage for the cashier.
Yeah, to sell the tickets and stuff like that.
And but we try to make it feel like an old depot, but because of all of the display and the prints and so forth, it becomes more of a museum.
What happens in this room when we're not doing television? I mean, do you come out here with your family, or do you come out with friends and fire up the stove and have hot toddies? And
yes, in the wintertime, last New Year's, we fired the engine up, and for the first time, we were able to blow the whistle at New Year's. And we all gathered around the stove and had champagne and mulled wine, and of course the clock was working. But you asked, what do I do when we're not making something like this? I sometimes slip out here and lock the door and just listen to that clock ticking. And I close my eyes and look at the different pictures and try to imagine how it would be to be back there at that time.
Do you miss that time? I mean, do you wish it was that way again?
No, not really. Not really. I like to point to it and walk out here when I feel like it, but I'm very modern and contemporary. I like all the new architecture and the new gadgets, the computers. But this is a great thing to go back to appreciate what went before.
How do you feel about airplanes?
I love them.
Do you really?
I'm a flyer, you know.
Now that I didn't know.
You didn't know that.
A lot of people who like railroads hate airplanes.
I took up flying right after World War II. And I stopped when they subdivided all the airfields around San Gabriel, and the smog got so thick I couldn't enjoy the scenery. So I gave it up.
But you're a contemporary Ward Kimball. You don't hanker for the days of the coal-burning locomotives and those horrible sleeper cars. Oh.
Sure, and before air-conditioned cars, you had to open the window of the sleeper, and you'd wake up in the morning and the pillow was covered with soot. And your eyes and face were covered with soot. I remember that. I came out to California in 1921.
I got to stop here for commercials, but we'll continue from a different location on Grizzly Flats after these announcements, so I know you'll want to come back with us then. During the course of our setup for the train room here at Ward Kimball's house in San Gabriel, one of the fellows on the crew said if there's such a thing as reincarnation, he wants to come back as your kid, and this is probably part of the reason why. Tell about this room and the trains that are in it and where they came from.
Well, these trains are old antique toys, starting with 1870.
As compared to new antique toys.
Yes, 1870, and the youngest train I have is 1941. For all American trains, every manufacturer, Ives, Voltam, Lionel, you name it, it's all in here. And on the shelves, we have plenty more trains. I get tired of seeing this run, I can change.
And in here, as you say, are the trains that were manufactured by all the American makers of trains.
Yes.
And when did electric trains start? When did we go from clockwork to electric?
Well, Carlisle and Finch, a little Ohio electric company, started about 1895 with a funny little trolley car that had rubber band drive. And from there it progressed till you see the sophisticated trains we have today.
Now, what did they run on? Because now we have the transformers. Everybody knows the thing that runs the trains. But what did they run on then?
Well, most houses didn't have house electricity.
Exactly.
You know, they're still burning candles and kerosene. You can't run a train on kerosene. So they used the early wet cell batteries. Remember, filled with acid that dump over and take the finish off
I don't
the floor?
remember.
I know you wouldn't. Or dry cell batteries. And then when you had electricity coming in about 1905-10, why we start having electric trains.
Tell about some of the pieces, like now this station right here in the center that's got all the people and the trees. Who made that and when?
That is the biggest station that Lionel made. It's called the Terrace Station. That was from the 1930s. When, I don't know, they brought all this wonderful stuff out during the Depression, Lionel did, and who bought it?
Nobody.
Just rich kids, right? And so that's why some of the stuff's pretty rare. Look at that powerhouse, how big that is.
All right, now that for George is right over here. Yeah, that's it. Now that's a powerhouse. And on the side, I don't know if they can see it from that side, but on our side there are all kinds of little switches, which I assume would tell you which track was on and...
No, that's where you hit all your little transformers.
Oh, I see.
See, it takes, to have a big layout, I have 5 transformers under the table. The kids in those days would put the transformers inside of the powerhouse. Where else? And then they take their lead lines off the switches.
What determines, now you gave us a hint here, the more expensive sets back then are the rarest sets now, the hardest ones to find?
Well, and some of the cheapest sets back then are some of the hardest things to find, and therefore some of the most expensive as antiques. That turns out so many times, like the Howard Company that invented the Christmas tree lamp. It only made trains for 3 years. And they're very rare. They're kind of tinny. They're not too efficient. The motors are lousy, but I suppose they go for big money.
Where do you find this stuff?
You don't find it much anymore.
No, but you found it. What was the period of time that you were able to assemble a car?
I would say between 1940 and 1958, 1960, and now you never see it.